Welcome back for another episode. It's time for our year-end summary video for 2021. 2021 was overall a very unique year, like most such years in Alberta. And although conditions were variable across the province, I'm going to concentrate on the challenges faced in my relatively small area around Lethbridge, west and south. Late winter, early spring weather, we had really limited snow cover and lack of frost, and wind erosion became a serious concern, especially for the dryland areas north and west of Lethbridge. Erosion was so severe in many places that winter wheat fields were sandblasted away right down to the depth of seeding. Potato, corn stubble fields were particularly vulnerable, and we had overall extremely low soil moisture, especially subsoil moisture. This dry weather also left us very susceptible to fires, which is what happened between Carmen Gay and Claire's home, which burned quite a few acres, and we lost a couple homes, and all that land was particularly susceptible to erosion in early spring. So now we get to seeding time, and although subsoil moisture was basically non-existent in most places, there was adequate surface moisture in the topsoil for seeding. Surface moisture was low, resulting in reduced surface germinated weeds, such as kochia and Russian thistle at early seeding time. Winter annual weeds were basically normal levels. Seeding really did start pretty early in April, and around April 10th the average daily temperature was holding above zero. Small rain showers from the 18th to May 1st gave good emergence and got the weeds started as well. Overall, seeding progressed very smoothly with a minimum of stoppages due to weather, with many farms completing seeding very early on average. Large daily temperature swings at this time were frequent, with nighttime temperatures frequently at -5 with daytime highs of +20. Nighttime temperatures kept soil temperature relatively low, and many crops saw slow emergence due to temperature and moisture. Despite these conditions, there was not a lot of widespread damage to young plants like canola from frost. The period of May 5th to 20th saw a lot of windy and dry conditions, finally getting a decent rain event of 25 millimeters on May 23rd. By the May 17th, we were already experiencing +30°C daytime temperatures. Crops were experiencing severe drought stress already prior to this rain. Insect pressure was fairly average, with an overall reduction in flea beetle complaints compared to the previous season. Cutworms did appear in a few fields and caused damage here and there in patches. Wireworm pressure was quite heavy across the area, but was generally kept suppressed with seed treatments. Wireworm feeding mainly seemed to focus on stem feeding rather than on the seed. Likely this was probably due to early seeding into cold soils. The wireworms were not super active before the seed had a chance to germinate and only started to feed later. Many cereal crops were just hitting the 3 to 4 leaf stage in the first week of June when the heat really got turned up, with daytime temperatures of 30 to 34°C and nighttime lows near freezing. Crops and weeds were very heavily stressed and did not react well to herbicides. Many herbicide combinations this year caused additional stress to crops, stunting them even farther. Weeds, especially kochia and Russian thistle, were hardened off by the conditions and protected with a thick waxy cuticle, resulting in poor uptake of herbicides. Many fields had not received a pre-seed application either, meaning that on average weeds were larger and more tolerant. Due to the weather conditions, many fields were sprayed quite late in staging when the weather was more favorable but the weeds were larger. By June 5th to 12th, the weather was cooler and we had a decent 11 millimeter shower to cool things off. But by June 14th, temperatures were once again in the 35°C range, and the crops really started to show the stress. Many stressed fields were pastured or silaged early at this time. Early July once again cooled off for a couple days and gave another 25 millimeters of moisture between the 5th and the 7th. After that, the daytime temperatures were at or above 30°C for the rest of the month. A constant west breeze sucked remaining moisture from the soil surface and caused damage to delicate leaf tips, especially on crops such as oats and wheat. Flowering canola saw some very severe flower blasting, with many main stems only sitting a handful of pods before failing. Later side branches helped make up for this, especially on irrigation. Most of the pulse crops stayed very short, with many yellow peas starting flowering at only 6 to 8 inches of height. Disease pressure overall was very low due to the dry, windy conditions and the open canopies of those crops. Weed pressure really started to become apparent with thin, dry crops not able to compete with drought-hardy weeds such as kochia. Lamb's quarters and pigweeds really seemed to become the major weed of many irrigated fields this year. Insect pressure in canola was very sporadic, with some early fields having very high cabbage seed pod weevil numbers, but most were below threshold levels. Lygus counts were very sporadic, with some areas having very high pressure early in the season and other areas not developing until later. Grasshoppers and breeding swarms of blister beetles began making an appearance in early July, with grasshoppers becoming a major concern by the end of the month. By the end of July, most pasture and grassland areas were burned off from the heat, and the grasshoppers really started to move in force, destroying canola and cereals as they moved into fields. Due to poor crop conditions, many went uncontrolled early on. A few hailstorms also moved through the area and completely wiped out several areas, including a very large swath of land south of Lethbridge near Cardston. As we moved into August, we did see a few small rain showers with 25 millimeters falling on the 17th. This was good moisture, but was too late to add much to yield, with most of the canola crops already very close to swath timing. In many fields it was more trouble than it was worth, causing stressed out mature canola to start flowering again. Pulse and cereal crops also saw new green growth in many fields that were not fully mature yet. Grasshoppers continued to be a concern in the heat, feeding on any green remaining in the fields. Sawfly started to become apparent in many areas, with some varieties showing severe damage and lodging. Some fields were up to 75% stand loss. It was at this time, with the crops drying down, that the grasshoppers started to even feed on the weeds in the field, like this recording that I got near Lethbridge of grasshoppers eating sow thistles. Harvest started in early August, with many stressed field peas coming off before the 20th. Small rain showers in the last week of August slowed progress and decreased grain quality. And again on September 11th, a 15 millimeter rain slowed the harvest. Many canola fields experienced sprouting in the pods. On average, harvest was 1 to 2 weeks ahead of normal. Many more fields than normal received a pre-harvest application as well, both to stop crop regrowth from showers and to dry down large weeds prior to harvest. Yields were overall lower than normal for canola, even on irrigation due to flower blasting. Dryland yields of all crops were extremely variable, with the poorest fields being grazed or silaged early in the season. Frequently, hilltops and sides saw very poor to non-existent yields, with low areas of some dryland fields being decent and bringing up the average. Some fields managed to catch a few showers and were close to normal averages. Average dryland yield spreads were quite large across my territory, with the highest yields tending to be south of Lethbridge, where the weather was a bit more moderate. Canola was probably the most variable, with dryland field averages anywhere between 7 bushels up to 50. Lentils averaged between 5 and 25 bushels, peas 10 to 35, barley 20 to 60, wheat and durum went anywhere from 10 to 50 bushels depending on the exact area. With crop prices rising sharply over the summer, financials for many fields still looked decent, with income per acre relatively stable or even higher than normal, even with the poorest yields. A field of durum that only yields 20 bushels, if you can sell for $21 a bushel, the financials still look pretty good. With an early harvest and some more favorable conditions, winter wheat seeding seemed to be popular this fall, with a lot of acres going in, some very early in order to provide fall grazing for cattle. Emergence on dryland was very spotty, with many dryland fields struggling to find the moisture to germinate. Spring stands may be thin in many fields as a result. Fall weed control was above average, with open warm conditions and the early harvest. Regrowth of perennial weeds such as Canada thistle and quackgrass after harvest led to good opportunities to get them under control this fall. Dry surface conditions have prevented winter annuals from germinating until very late. So far, up to now in early December, our fall has been very open and warm, with minimal moisture events, not a whole lot of hard frost, and very little for snow. Wind continues to strip moisture from exposed soil and create issues. Just in the last week, we've had several days with over 100 km/h wind gusts. So what can we expect for the 2022 season? The smart bet seems to be betting on continued dry conditions. Subsoil moisture reserves are still severely depleted, and without a decent amount of winter moisture, spring could be a struggle. I would expect grasshopper and sawfly pressure to be very high in the same areas as this year, so especially for sawfly, you might want to take a look at your wheat and durum varieties. Make sure that you are getting solid stem varieties to compensate for that. Fertilizer prices are of course record high, as well as grain prices. Due to poor yields in many fields, soil samples are still showing a decent amount of nutrient carryover, which will really help with those financials for this coming year. Nitrogen and phosphate biologicals and boosters will likely be a popular option to help save money on those nutrient inputs this year. And of course, due to the drought conditions, herbicide carryover will be a real issue for many crop rotations. Any field treated with Lontrell or clopyralid should not be seeded to pulses, and any pulse fields treated with a Group 2 product such as Viper, Python, Odyssey, Solo should only be seeded to wheat, barley, or a clearfield canola, not to durum. With many of our irrigation reservoirs very low at the present time, we will be very much relying on a very good snowpack in the mountains this winter. Expect a reduction of water usage on irrigation if this does not happen. In reality, it's hard to predict weather in Alberta, and your guess is as good as mine when it comes to springtime conditions. So let's all hope for ideal conditions and a bumper crop for 2022. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.